throw away that flock and toss out those tufts, because today we're changing the way you base forever. Maybe. Each of these bases not only looks great, but they were all pretty easy to pull off and used absolutely zero, unless you count PVA glue, absolutely almost zero traditional modelling and basing materials. Now, regardless of how good you do or do not think my examples look, you're probably asking yourself at this point, why would I want to throw away my basing materials? And, well, there's a couple of answers to that, to be honest with you. Firstly, all of these products are amazing, and I don't necessarily really actually think you should do away with them altogether. In fact, many of the bases I'm going to show you today could probably be further improved by adding some traditional basing materials like sand or tufts. But second, and a little bit more importantly in the spirit of the video, it's about fostering a process-driven mindset rather than a product-driven one. Because by learning to make something out of nothing, we kind of empower ourselves to do more with what we do have. And I think we can probably all agree that that's good for everyone, right? Now, everything that you're about to see me do was created with the intention of being achievable with hand tools, things that you should have as a hobbyist, like a pin vise, sanding sticks, that kind of stuff. But for the interest of speed in making this video, I've elected to use my Dremel, and if you have one, I would recommend you do the same, just because it's faster. Now, even if you don't have a posh Dremel like mine, you can pick one up dirt cheap these days with a bunch of accessories on Amazon for 15 or 20 quid. They're not a super expensive tool, and they take the place of a lot of other things that you might otherwise buy. What I'll do is drop a link below to one that I think is good value. It won't be my Dremel one because they're a bit more expensive, but it's one that I think would be worth picking up for the money. Anyway, look, without any further fuss or ceremony, let's get on with making some bases, and we're going to begin with that cheeky little cobblestone number. To start out with, I'm going to use a cylindrical burr to carve out a straight line, and then the same tool to rough out some sort of oldie-worldy, flagstoney kind of pattern directly into the material of the base. Once those are done, I'll now get the burr sideways onto the work so that it's really flat to it, and create a step down by carefully removing material in long sweeps. All of this work so far would normally be done with a hand file and would take a long time, so I'm already very glad that I chose to do this with a Dremel. However, next we in fact do need a hand file, because we just need to clean up the lines and remove any fluffies from the plastic, and once that's done, it actually starts to really take shape. For the painting, it's just some greys to begin with, getting a base down and making sure it's nice and solid before washing it all over with some thin dark brown. After that, I just sponge the base colour back on to get some nice texture on the surfaces, and then a heavy dry brush of pale grey to really brighten things up. Then it's a couple of glazes, green here and there for a sort of mossy kind of look, and then just reinstating some of that dark brown here and there, especially in those gaps between the stones. Straight on to our next one, not to waste your time, we're moving on to that cracked river base, and we'll be making extensive use of this finely pointed diamond tipped burr. To start out with, I'm just going to town, just really roughing up the surface of the base with dotty little gouges. I want the surface of this base to be super, super rough, but also to kind of have a subtle regularity to it, so I'm working from one side to the other. From there, I'll then use exactly the same tool just to start carving out some jaggedy little cracks in the surface of the base. And once that's done, and again, once the fluffies are all cleaned up, you'll have something that looks a bit like this. To get it painted, we begin with an all-over coat of reddish brown, paying particular attention to get into the cracks and crevices. Then we'll add a bit of sandy yellow to it and just dry brush that over to pick up the texture. This is more just for visual reference. After that, we're going to just really messily wet blend the surface using the same previously applied colours and a little bit of off-white at the top end as well, just to create some tonal variation. This is a nice opportunity to just paint very loosely without any concern for neatness, be quite random, embrace it. And then it's just a all-over wash with this dark reddy brown wash. I used Targor Raid Shade from Citadel. And then yeah, a little dark brown rim job, and that gets us over the line. For this SciFi base, we're going to begin by, well, essentially polishing the surface of the base to get rid of as much of that bobbly texture as we can. Even with the help of the Dremel, I still had to go in with a sanding stick here to get it as smooth as I wanted. Next, I'll take a cutting disc and just slightly score a line in the base off-centered by a bit. The cutting disc just helps you keep the line straight. Then it's just a normal drill bit, just a straight up normal drill bit to add in a regular pattern of holes to look like some sort of plate flooring. You could do all sorts of different stuff here. Painting is, again, really simple. Starting out by just lavering a bunch of black onto the surface of the plated side, and then whilst it's still wet, we'll just sweep across it with some greys to create a little wet blended gradient. Now it's edge highlights with some lighter greys. All around the base perimeter, even those individual holes give those a bit of a highlight, at least on one side. Some scratches are a good idea here too, that can really sort of bring a bit of character to the whole arrangement. After this, I chose a neutral colour for the ship's deck, and I decided to go with beige. There's probably lots of other colours you could use. But once that's down, we're going to just wet blend a highlight in again in the same direction as last time. So just, sticking to a theme of techniques that we're using. I then decided I wanted to add a little freehand, just for some character really. I only put this in very quickly, so I just wrote on it with a deck designation. And then as a finishing touch, a reddy brown and an orange, both applied in sort of very thin consistencies, will dry to create some pretty convincing rust patches. Then it's just a grey rim job for this one to tidy things up, and that brings us to a very satisfying close. This glowing green toxic pool is absolutely the most involved one of the bunch, but it is also really fun. It starts life with our normal round base, and we're going to use a burr to trace around the perimeter and cut a hole out from the centre. Once that middle bit is pushed out, set it aside because we're actually going to use it later. Taking the remains of our base and just any thin, hard material, I chose a blister from a metal miniature, but you could use cardboard or a bit of balsa wood. Anyway, what we're going to do is just cut out a circle which will sit inside the base from underneath. So once you have that cut out and sized correctly, just super glue it in from the underside, and now when you flip it over, you've got a little recess on the top. Now, remember I said save the bit that you cut out from the base? We're actually going to cut it up into some tiny little pieces to use like a scatter. And whilst this is not really any different to using an aggregate that you might buy from a hobby shop, what I'm hoping to demonstrate here is that you can often just improvise stuff together out of things you might otherwise have thrown away. Whilst you're chopping stuff up though, also find yourself a bit of sprue and just cut a couple of bits off of that and then rough them up a little bit. These are just going to be like some girders or something that are sticking out of the toxic goo. Now we're going to glue our sprue bits onto the base to create a little bit of height to the scene. And then we're going to take advantage of a really cool little chemical reaction. First off, we'll spread a bunch of PVA glue into that recess by moving it around with a toothpick. And then we drop a few dobs of super glue straight into the PVA and we start mixing it about with a cocktail stick. Very quickly, the two materials start to kind of form this horrible snotty structure. It looks really gross. Then we just sprinkle on our homemade aggregate around the edge of the base, manipulating it with a little toothpick if necessary. And after all of that, we can finally move on to painting. This is definitely one that will speed up in batches. Now, fortunately, the painting is much simpler than the making side, starting out predictably with a black priming and then just a nice dark green base coat all over. With that dry, I then take this bright emerald green and just overbrush it onto absolutely everything, not particularly being neat, before then doing a lighter overbrush with a real bright acid green. With all that established, then I just use some really light and vibrant greens to pick out some highlights here and there, so to create a feel that this toxic gunk is emitting light somehow. To bring it all together, I boshed some gloss varnish over this one to give it a nasty wet look, and then I just wrapped it up with a matte black rim for maximum contrast. Definitely worth the time spent, it's so gross looking. But for our last base, you actually get the complete opposite of the previous one, where there's almost no building to do at all. I'm just going to start out with a polished base, exactly like I made for the SciFi one, except without the line scored down the middle. Because here we're going to do a marble base, and that's really all about the painting, which starts with just a few solid coats of a nice ivory or beige colour. Once that is really solid, do one final coat of the same colour, but make the paint much wetter this time. Then grab a dark grey and start to smear in some marbly strands, letting the wet paints go all kind of inky and meldy, and just using a brush to drag them about. Once you've got something that looks right to your eye, let it dry completely before then moving on to the next step, which is just to take an even darker grey and paint some lovely little veiny bits all over the base. Generally, I like these to sort of loosely follow the darker shapes that we made in the last step. Then we can pick out a uniform side of the lines and add edge highlights, only ever on that one side. This consistency in which side you highlight creates the impression of a single light source picking up the edges of the cracks or veins. Now we're going to absolutely smother this thing in gloss varnish. You want it to be offensively thick in order to get this next trick to work. Because when it's really thick, we can actually blast it with a hairdryer intensely and it will crack the varnish as well. Then it's just rim job time again and our beautiful marble is all done. Like I said at the start, this lesson isn't about making you abandon your sand and tufts. Instead, it's about showing the creative process from another angle, where the techniques and physical input are prioritized over the product selection. By taking this approach, we not only build and broaden our skill set, but it gives us an opportunity then to take that further by adding those products to our already process-built base. Think of it kind of like using the products to enhance your already existing skills, and I think that's pretty dope. So if you enjoyed this video, why not give it a thumbs up? If you want to see more like it, why not subscribe to the channel? You could even comment below and tell me which one of the 5 was your favourite. That'd be pretty cool to see. If you really do love the content though, and you want to support the channel, if you check the description below, you will see links to my Patreon and my Ko-fi. And for just £1 a month, that's what, about $1.15, $1.20 if you're in the States, you can support the channel directly, but also get access to my Discord, which is a wicked little community where you can chat with other like-minded hobbyists, and I'm present there every day if you ever want to twist my ear about stuff. So that would be amazing. Please do show your support, and thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye for now, folks.